let's talk about, we're going to talk about incident response forensics is the first one, and then policy, security policy is the second lecture for tonight. And the lab is forensics, and they got some tools that you can use, some forensic tools, kind of give you an idea of what you do, how you handle the situation if you have an incident. So the objectives describe the stages and responsibilities of a formal incident response policy. We need to be sure that we've laid out responsibilities and everybody knows what they're going to do, because it can get pretty panicky, like in most crises. Describe the characteristics of the forensics investigations and computer systems. And before we get going on the slides, some of you guys have had some experience doing this stuff, and the policies next one. Please feel free to contribute so that everybody else kind of knows what they're getting into. Network management, a lot of fun, a lot of challenges, troubleshooting and all that stuff. Protecting the network, a lot of challenges, can be very frustrating. The new devices that we have, the application firewalls that do deep packet inspection, have made things better, I think. But there is no single tool, and that's one of the things that I hope you come away from this course. There is no single tool. There's no magic app. There's no magic program that's going to make your network secure. It's a lot of work, a lot of training, and you need a lot of cooperation from everybody from the top down, because if you don't have it, you're going to have little holes here and little holes there. You may not have anything major happen, but you don't want to leave those vulnerabilities out there for the possibility. So incident response procedures. This is if something has happened or if we think something has happened, because we don't always know when an attack's happened. And a lot of companies, some of these companies have gone months. I think that Home Depot was like, 6 months before they knew that they had been breached, and people were stealing the credit card information. There have been companies gone 18 months with a compromise and not know it. The one for which one was it? The open server, open authentication that just happened had been going on probably since years. So it's not always apparent when there has been a breach. That's why you have to do all of the things that we've talked about: the monitoring, the sniffing, the scanning, the Wiresharks, the lab reviews, or the log reviews, all of those things, so that you can detect, and hopefully detect early on, if something has happened. And if it has happened, or we think it's happened, we do the incident response procedures. The actions, the incident management is the actions and guidelines for dealing with incidences, and we need guidance for these things. We need policies, and we need some specifics. And we need people in authority on the team that's going to manage it, because decisions have to be made when we do these things. An incident is where security is breached. It doesn't have to be a major. If any security is breached, then we have an incident. The NIST defines it as the act of violating an explicit or implied security policy. Can be difficult to plan these things, because sometimes the aims may be incompatible. We want to reestablish a secure working system, and it's get it up, get the network up, get it moving. Do something, don't just stand there, but you have to do it in a secure manner. And then the rush to make the network operational again may prevent us from doing the second one, which is preserve evidence with the aim to prosecution. We want to be able to collect evidence for a couple reasons. One, to see why it happened and see what we need to do, the follow-up and the lessons learned kind of thing after that. We want to prevent reoccurrence, but at the same time we want to get the business back in business, because this may, of course, it may or may not have taken the business down. A major one would have. The immediate action can have a critical impact on what's going on. One of the first reactions is generally to pull the plug, quote, pull the plug, unquote, just shut it down to keep anything from happening. We may not want to do that. We may want to just contain it and watch the intruder to see what's going on after we've isolated the action, so that he or she can't do any further damage. Anyhow, to have the proper response, we need trained employees. We need to train people and designate people as to what they're going to do, what their responsibilities are if something happens, including just the ordinary worker bee who, if they see something strange, need to report these things. It's the if you see something, say something. That really does apply in security. Something odd, I mean, usually, the internet's down, the internet's slow, network's slow, this or that. Could be a reason for that. Could be that you're overloaded at the time. The overload could be because somebody has violated your network security. Anyhow, the incident response life cycle, the first thing is preparation. And we want to make the systems resilient to attack, and those are the things that we have talked about in the prior meetings that we've had. Harden the systems, write policies and procedures. What are we going to do? How are we going to do things? But we need all those things. You need it in writing. You need it in writing, so you can do the training. Establish confidential communication channels, and this can be confidential communication channels with other corporations, other partners, or it could be confidential communication channels with your employees, so that they have a way to maybe anonymously report somebody. Early on in the Navy, not that early on, but in the mid-'80s, there were a lot of people selling things that they shouldn't have to other countries. I had a neighbor who was an intel officer, and there was another neighbor, I didn't get involved in this, but he and his wife showed up with like 2 new BMWs one day, and the other neighbor kind of reported him because, what's this guy doing? He was a lieutenant. He was in a pay grade where he shouldn't have been able to afford the 2 new BMWs. As it wound up, her father had won part of a lottery in Chicago, or won not the big money, but some money in a lottery, and gave it to him. So they were splurging that way. So confidential communication channels, that one didn't turn out all that great, but so that people can report what they perceive, at least, as suspicious activity or possible suspicious activity. You got to investigate all those things. Detection and analysis, we got to determine if something actually did happen. And again, you may or may not know when you've been attacked. It's not always apparent. If you have a really good hacker, they're going to be on your network for a while before you figure out anything's going on. After we determine something, then we have to do containment, eradication, and recovery. What we want to do is limit the scope, limit any damage that's going on. And again, here we say the first inclination is to pull the plug. That may not be the correct thing to do. The other thing, when you do that containment and eradication and recovery, you want to preserve the scene. One of the things that you don't want to do is bring other machines online, because you don't want to disturb what's already on that machine if you've isolated it and you know which one it is. You want to isolate it, and then we'll talk about in the forensics part, you're going to image and find out what the state of the memory is, was it the hard drive, and all of the elements that we could have. Then we want to contain the system. We may want to remove it, and then we want to come back to a secure state. If we can isolate the system, we may want to allow the attack to continue so that we can observe it and see what's going on. And also, when we talk about testing our security, will give you a great way if you had a live to test your security, test your other controls, what goes on with it. And then the post-incident activity, analyze what happened and make changes. Probably going to be a lot of finger pointing. That doesn't do a whole lot of good. You did this, you didn't do this, you didn't whatever. What you've got to determine is what happened, what worked, what didn't work. And you have to do that in a calm, reflective environment. If you don't, then you're going to continue to be vulnerable. And after this, we want to document everything, lessons learned. And I know in the Navy and you guys that were there in Navy, Army, whatever else, and probably a lot of businesses, you do lessons learned, and then we go do the same thing, and we learn the same lesson over and over and over. You need to document these things. That's something that we typically don't do all that well as networkers because we want to get in and play. But documenting is important. We used to do that on the network, and then we got an administrator who was really a very good documenter, but you would say, oh yeah, that happened to us about 3 years ago, but I don't remember how we fixed it. Documentation will help you with that. In the preparation, we have policies, and the policies when we have policy, we're going to report, categorize, and prioritize what's going on. Triage is the first person on the scene is going to be the triage, and that's hopefully somebody that's going to know what to do in those circumstances. Lines of communication available for contact information. We need to have those. You need to be able to get information and get information from people, get information to people. So the lines of communication, a phone list, a phone number list for reporting is always helpful. Reporting is one of the things that's going to come a little later, but who do you need to tell about what goes on? And then personnel and resources in the preparation, who's going to be available to investigate this thing. The Computer Security Incident Response Team, CSIRT, or CERT team, is something that may be in any size organization, but it's probably going to be in a larger organization. And the members of this team, that goes back to the personnel and resources, the members of this team need to have decision-making authority. You have to have somebody there that's in control. We need the technical skill sets, and then again, a range of individuals who can authorize actions. As a part of this thing, you need some legal advice, some legal expertise so that you know what you can and can't do with these things. And the best outcome obviously is going to be prevention, but if you don't have prevention, then we need to move on to the rest of them. That's always the objective of our planning, preparation, buying tools, training individuals, training, having a training program for everyone in the organization is to prevent this sort of action from taking place. Do you have detection and analysis? Detection of collate events to determine if the incident is managed, if it needs to be managed. Things that we're going to have are precursors. These are events that make an event more likely, and that could be things like there's a new malware on the loose. There's an update that we didn't put on maybe, but we need to have those things, and that's kind of some of what that IBM artificial intelligence program does. Automated detection and analysis, we're going to be running our IDSs, we'll do log analysis, and we'll have alerts, and alerts are in the tools that we use can send you alerts, and you want to get them if you have unusual activity. Disk activity goes up. Bandwidth is a high number in the middle of the night when it shouldn't be a high number. Disk utilization, processor utilization, memory utilization, all of those things. And inspection of the site, physical inspection of the site. Do things look normal? Are there machines kind of there that shouldn't be? Are there wires running in places that you wouldn't expect them to be? What is the other end of the wire? And then the notification procedures for employees, and this is the confidential reporting, so that somebody, if they suspect something, can anonymously or confidentially, not necessarily anonymously, but confidentially report that what they perceive as an issue. Public reporting of new vulnerabilities are one of the things, and that's the new malware that has just come out, and those are the kinds of things that you really need to stay up on. New vulnerabilities or threats by a vendor, regulator, media, or other outside party, any of those things, but when we find out about it. The first responder is the first person on the scene. So we need to train all employees to at least some degree. The first responder is going to kind of pay attention to what's going on and try to secure the scene so that the rest of the team can come in and isolate and investigate, and if necessary, I mean, if we can isolate and observe, that's good. If we can't, then we need to move on. One of the I think generally, it's not in this book, but in a lot of books, first recommendations, if it's really starting to go bad, is unplug the NIC, because if they can't communicate and the machine can't communicate, the intruder will know that it's been interrupted, but you can stop the attack that way in many cases against the rest of the network, not against that machine, obviously. Analysis and incident identification. The incident, again, any event that breaches security policy. Classify and prioritize. False positives are when we think we had an attack and we really didn't have an attack. So we need to find out why we're getting those and try to eliminate the false positive. We're also going to get some false negatives, and those are really going to be dangerous when we have an attack and aren't able to detect that attack. The objective is that we don't have it either. The containment response must satisfy different competing objectives. What's the loss or damage? What damage or theft has occurred already? Is there a potential for further loss? What countermeasures are available? What can we do with this thing? And what are their costs? And we talked a little bit about that last night. What are the costs and implications of the countermeasures? What could alert the attacker? What can we do if we alert the attacker that he has been detected? What evidence of the attack's got to be gathered and preserved? We need to do all of those things. Isolation, we can prevent or interrupt. Can we prevent or interrupt an attack if we do the isolation? We allow it to proceed. We can't allow it to proceed until actual harm is threatened. That means that you've got your team there that can do the analysis, watch what's going on in the system itself. And you want to quarantine and remove the device. Quarantine, we may quarantine and watch it. If we have to stop the attack, then we'll remove the device and make it whole again by either removing the virus, removing the Trojan, whatever else, or you may have to restore the system from its backup. Breach, escalation, and notification. It may be that we have to refer it to a higher authority. In some cases, those of us who may be on a CERT team are not, it's beyond our pay grade, and somebody else is going to have to make those kinds of decisions. Inform affected parties, and that's always going to be the case: suppliers, customers, users, regulatory bodies, law enforcement, and they constantly say, and rightfully so, if you've lost personally identifiable information from your customers, you've got to let them know about that. Credit card number, you've got to let them know about that. You may need to cancel the credit card. Even if you're not sure that it's been stolen, you've got to assume the worst. You've got to assume that it was part of the affected database, or the information that they were trying to do. Eradication and recovery says choose the least bad. In many cases, it's going to be a matter of choosing the least bad option, because in many of these cases, there aren't any really good options. Investigation of the causes or nature of the incident might not be clear. We need to do further investigation. Further investigation is warranted. And so you have to do those. Containment, allow the attack to proceed, but ensure that valuable systems or data are not at risk. We're going to, again, quarantine the system, isolate the system, and allow it to go. Hot swap, if we have the information, the resources available, a hot standby, a backup system can be brought into operation, and the live system frozen to preserve the evidence. But again, that's going to mean that we have a system available that has all the updates, have all the data, all of everything on it. It's going to have to be a replica of the system that was attacked. And prevention, the countermeasures to end the incident are taken on the live system, even though it may destroy evidence when you do this. And again, when we go to choose the least bad, there's frequently not a good option in these areas. We want to do what we think is best based on you've always got to make decisions based on the information at hand. It's easy to second guess. It's easy to figure out a better one 2 days, 3 days, 4 days later, but you have to make decisions at the time based on what you know at the time. Some other information may become available later, but you didn't have that. You may have, if you had that, if I'd have known that, I wouldn't have done this. If I'd known this stock was going to crash, I wouldn't have bought it. But you don't know that at the time. Recovery, remove the infected files or restore it. If you can remove the files and continue with the system, that's good. If you can't, you may need to wipe it out and restore it from a backup. Don't restore the backup over top of it. Wipe the whole thing out and restore it. Re-audit the security controls, and again, notify all the affected parties. Telling people what's going on is a big deal. Because you can develop a sense of trust with them as long as you let them know what's going on and let them know what you're doing to prevent this, and give them a sense of confidence that you know what you're doing. And that goes back to the policies and procedures. Have we effectively established them? Have we practiced them? Have we trained the individuals? Do they know what to do? And when you start doing it, do you look like you know what you're doing, or do you look like the Three Stooges as you're going through the system? The post-incident activity, back to lessons learned. How did it develop? What caused it? How was it allowed to develop? How could it be prevented? And if we can't prevent it, how can we reduce the impact? Was the incident and response adequate, and what could be improved? And this is going to be, again, something that has to be done in a calm environment without finger pointing. It's going to be a situation that's going to be a little bit hard to control in many instances, perhaps. Reporting, regulators may require that depending on the industry that you're in. Reassure suppliers, customers, and the users. And if something has gone, or you think that something may have been stolen, let people know that, because you don't want them to be surprised. The term I was trying to think of here in lessons learned is brainstorming. And in brainstorming, you just put things up. There's no comment on it, no, yeah, good, bad, or whatever. After you get all of the things on the board, then you're going to prioritize them, throw out the things that you don't really want to consider, and then focus in on everything else. But you really need to, if you have an incident, to do a thorough review of what happened. Now we're going to shift to the forensic procedures a little bit, and this is an image of the forensic OS forensics, which is the tool that they're going to have you use in the lab. I know some of you have already done it. May use a third party to do forensics. Law enforcement may step in to do it. If it's a high enough level and it meets the standard, the FBI may actually be there to help you. We'll collect evidence that can be presented at trial, because one of the objectives is always going to be to prosecute the perpetrator of these things. Due process is one of the things that we have, and the due process is a term in the U.S. and the U.K. common law to require that people only be convicted of crimes following the fair application of the laws of the land. So there is due process in each of these things, and we do have computer misuse legislation that is available, and they can be prosecuted under these, and those are things that kind of sometimes change, and you have a lot of hearings and they make new laws, and you really need to stay up to date on those. The collection of evidence, we're going to gain the digital evidence, capture live data in the order of volatility. So when we talk about the order of volatility on the machine, so we're going to look at the CPU registers, cache memory, including the disk controllers, GPUs, and so on. After that, a routing table, ARP cache, process table, and kernel statistics. From there, memory, RAM, temporary file systems, the disk, remote logging, physical configuration, and network topology, and archival media. So you want to capture the things that can go away quickly first, the memory, those sorts of things. Disk, what you don't want to happen is the disk to be changed before you can image the disk. And when you capture the system image, the disk, you're going to need to do a hash, and you always work on the copy. And the reason you need to do a hash is so that you can prove that you didn't change anything. The time offset, some Windows functions use the local time or use GMT, excuse me, and it displays a lot of the file system is in local time, but you need the time offset the time from you to GMT so that you don't get confused. And when you look at logs, the time can be confusing. You need to know which time zone that's being logged in. Network traffic and logs, we're going to look at all of those things. Most machines aren't really configured to do all the logging that we would like at this time. Don't record all the network traffic, because if you did, you'd run out of space. We had I was doing a continued ed class, and the network administrator was in it, and he was going to bring in that day, he's going to show us the number of attacks against the network during a day, or number of scans against the network at a day, and he was going to print them off until he found out there were like 900 pages worth of logs for that day. So when we say log analysis, you're going to need some help in this. You're going to need some software in this, but it really does need to be done. And I'll jump the gun here, talk about big data analysis, which is good at handling large amounts of data, unstructured data. It also has tools to allow images like graphs, because if you look at a graph, you can immediately see if a particular machine had a lot of network traffic. So those kinds of things in the analysis you would want to look at. And you're going to interview witnesses, somebody that was working on the machine, somebody that was in the area, did somebody come in, all sorts of things. Witnesses that may or may not have any information. You take notes on those. You don't want to make them feel threatened, so you're going to have to question them in a manner so that it is not threatening. It's just like a help desk that you can't. You've got to do it in such a manner that you don't make the user feel like they're being prosecuted, so that you don't make the witness feel like they're being prosecuted. The next is the handling and analyzing evidence, preservation, bag and tag. You're going to have to tag everything, chain of custody, timeline on it, checksum to confirm the validity of the digital evidence, hashing. You may need to hash each of these things. Secured storage and transportation. The chain of custody is going to be a really big deal so that you can prove when you get to court that it didn't fall outside of that chain and that somebody else.
Would this be the legal hold stuff?
Yeah, something like that. Could be, yes. You have to be able to prove that somebody didn't have the opportunity to tamper with the evidence to make changes so that you could get a conviction, which we see all the time in the TV shows, I think. And then the analysis of the evidence, the forensic tool kits. There are some programs that are available, and they're generally tend to be relatively expensive. Linux has got a whole bunch of forensic tools that you can get, and they have a great price of free. The issue with the Linux tools in some cases are they're not as easy to use as maybe some of the Windows tools, although I think that I would still go to the Linux for analysis of these things. It's pretty much more straightforward than Windows would be. Perform all your analysis on the copies. Don't work on the original disk. The original disk, once you have made the image of it, the original disk should be in the bag and tag, chain of custody, and put into secure storage. And the transportation, secure storage and transportation, so that it gets to that location, proving again that nobody outside of whoever signed on the dotted line that I have custody of it had the opportunity to tamper with it. And then there's a big data down here, the analysis on the copies. Big data and big data, and I'm going to read this paragraph. Big data analysis techniques can assist in this process. Big data refers to large stores of unstructured information. Big data analysis tools used to search query-like functions to identify patterns and information of interest within unstructured files such as documents and spreadsheets. And when we're looking at a hard drive, it can be a lot of data. It can be overwhelming unless you use some of those techniques. And then it says big data analysis software often includes data visualization tools. And visualization is, at least for me and probably for most people, a lot more effective than just looking at a series of numbers. And then the last thing is to track the man hours and expenses, particularly if you're called in as a third party, as somebody that's going to do this for the company. So keep track of your hours, and everybody needs to, because that's how you're going to calculate the cost of the incident. So with that, describe the stages and responsibilities of a formal incident response policy. Describe the characteristics of the forensic investigation of computer systems. So let me get these questions. What are the 4 phases of incident response life cycle defined by NIST, and the ones that we did were defined by NIST.
Preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and post-incident activity.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
What is a CERT?
The Computer Security Incident Response Team.
Yeah. And what do they do?
Make your life hell.
Oh, come on. How did they do that?
Yeah, I agree with that one.
And make decision-making technical skills required to deal with different types of incidents.
Exactly. What type of threat source does supporting and protecting whistleblowers help to negate? Who are the whistleblowers going to be blowing the whistle on?
Their bosses, government, whoever they feel that's doing them wrong.
IRS insiders, so people that work for the company. You can't be a whistleblower on a hacker because they're not there yet.
Yeah, you can't bring in Snowden here.
Say what?
You can't bring no Edward Snowden in here.
That's right. I don't know how he was an analyst. I don't know how he got to be such an authority. I mean, the things he talks about, he obviously knows about them, but he had access to a lot more information than I would have thought that an analyst would have had access to.
Well, he wasn't a typical analyst. I mean, he was a threat assessment analyst. So pretty much he was actually a white hat.
Yeah, but he still had a much, for his level, he had a much larger reach than I would have thought he had. Because usually and we'll talk about some of this, the job sharing or compartmentalization, they normally do that, and if you compartmentalized, he had an awful lot of information from different compartments. What is the significance of the fact that digital evidence is latent? Yeah, I'll do that one. Evidence cannot be seen directly but must be interpreted so that the validity of interpreting the process must be unquestionable, and most of the evidence is going to be latent. You're probably not going to have any outright visibility of these things. What should be the first action at the crime scene during a forensic investigation?
I guess you want to secure it.
Containment.
Yeah, contain stuff.
Yeah, secure it, preserve evidence, preserve the crime scene, record everything, and pictures, videos, and you may have CCTV evidence. If that's the case, use all those things and preserve all the evidence, because what you want to be able to do, again, aside from preventing it happening again, is to be able to prosecute whoever did it. What software tools may be of use to the forensic investigator seeking to prepare a hard drive for analysis and of its contents? So what's the first thing we're going to do?
Contain the stuff,
Yeah,
the information.
Yeah, we've done that. Now we've got the hard drive. What we're going to do with it? First thing we're going to do.
Quarantine and device removal.
Yeah, device removal, and then we're going to make an image of it.
Yeah.
Work on the image, bag and tag the original, bag and tag the image, and bag and tag the original. We can work on the image because we're not going to take it to court. We're going to take what we found to court and take the original there. What might a file timestamp not show at which a crime, the time at which a crime was committed?
Depends on when you did it.
Yeah, well, it depends. A couple of things. It depends on whether it's recorded in local time or in Zulu time. And what you're talking about here is when we talked about record the time offset. Some of the stuff, particularly on Windows machines, some of the things are recorded in local time, and some of the things are recorded in they say universal and Zulu time. Universal Coordinated Time, UCT. What is a chain of custody form?
I guess that's the form that, like, if you deliver it to somebody, or
Yep.
they got to sign to say they received it.
Exactly. Yep.
From,
Identifying a piece of evidence, including where it came from, where it's stored, and who has handled it. What is meant by a first responder, and what initial action should they perform?
That's like anyone that shows up on the scene, the first one on the scene, and basically trying to figure out what happened. And
yeah. And what priority?
Now what do you have to do?
Yeah, exactly. How to be treated, and what priority should it be assigned? It may not be an ordinary kind of user. It probably should be whoever it's reported to, the responsible party that is reported to. Why might simply removing a device not be the appropriate response to an incident?
because he could have saved it somewhere else, I'm guessing, or
yeah, well, if we wanted to observe what was going on, it may alert the attacker, could lead to a loss of important evidence and allow the attacker to perform countermeasures. They're going to have a plan, and they probably would have practiced what they're going to do to you. And if this, then that. If this happens, are they going to be able to destroy the evidence? Are they going to be able to reset the logs? All those kinds of things. Maybe wipe the system. How might big data assist with a forensic examination of a computer hard drive?
They refer to large stores of unstructured information.
Yep. And they also use visualization and frequency analysis. But visualization is usually the thing that's going to be very helpful to us. This one is security policies and training. And again, I know that some of you have done these, so feel free to chime in. The ups and the downs of the policy. Everybody has policies of some sort. And a security policy is something that you need in order to establish the mindset of the company about security. So the objectives of this one are: describe the use of security policy and standards and guidelines, understand the importance of operational policies in reducing risk, understand the use of privacy and acceptable use policies, understand the importance of security awareness training. The policy is designed to help us, the staff, the employees, understand what our part is in security. It also helps in adopting a proper security policy. Can remove the uncertainty on what to do, and one of the examples that they give is a stranger wandering around in your workspace without a badge. What is the response that the company would expect from you? A lot of people just ignore it and walk on. How are you supposed to handle this? You're supposed to call security. You're supposed to ask them where to go, escort them to wherever they think they're trying to get to, because strangers wandering around without badges, probably not a good thing. Go ahead, Dean.
Shoot them.
Shoot them. That's what I was going to say. What is the policy? To shoot them? Well, in some really highly secure areas, that may be the policy. You don't want it to be. Yeah, you shoot them, hit them with a brick, or escort them back to the front, or whatever. Or is it just somebody in the company that didn't wear their badge that day and let them in? We had, at the school I worked at before, we tried really hard to get everybody to wear their badges. And the problem with these things, with these policies that you make, unless there's some sort of enforcement in the policy, why do it? People didn't want to wear their badges, and then one day somebody decided, oh, we're going to fix this. We're going to make everybody wear their badges. So they set out the door, and if they didn't have their badges, told them to go home and get their badges. Well, they went home, but they didn't get their badges, and they didn't come back that day. So that's one of the things that you got to consider when you're doing these things. What's going to be the enforcement? Anyhow, back to this. What we want to do with the policy is obtain support for security awareness. And again, this is going to have the support from the top in order to make this effective. The other thing that the policy does is it demonstrates due care and due diligence, which if you have a compromise, showing due care and due diligence can be significant as to whether you're held responsible for it and how much you're held responsible for it. So the corporate security policy, when we draft the security policy, the topics of it are the security mission statement is one of the first thing that should be there. What is the purpose of this thing? Explain the importance of security in the organization, and it should have some specificity. And the example that they give is secure our business data against all intrusions and maintain full business operations for 98% of the working time throughout the year. So what do we want to do? What is our objective with security? And again, that's one of those things that you really don't make any money with it. But if you don't have it, you don't make money because you didn't have it. Legal obligations, what are they? Areas of responsibility and lines of reporting. Reporting an intruder, reporting a virus infection, health hazard, a safety hazard, a fire hazard. How do people do these things? And then the types of data used by the organization have examples such like the database, accounting system, correspondence, email, telephone. What are we going to allow people to do? What kind of data do we have? Where is the data going to be stored? Or the servers, portable equipment, paper archives, and how are we going to protect those things? Where are we going to store them? How are we going to store them securely? Overview of methods of access control, and this is an overview. We're not going to get specific here, and it's not going to be technical. The technical part of this, access control, would be given to the IT folks, and they develop a password policy, for instance, and a change policy, all those things that we have talked about previously in the class. Overview of the transfer methods used to transfer data and security measures that are in place. Use email, teleworking, phone use, those sorts of things, and how is the security going to be associated with it. Guidelines for general users, the regular users, not the management, not the IT people. Safety and security procedures. The other things we've talked about: authoring, confidentiality, distribution, acceptable use, internet and email privileges. What can you do? Can you use your company email for private purposes? Can you use your private email for company purposes? The problem with a private email for company purposes is you don't have any history. You don't have any audit trail for something that may be important to the company. Disciplinary measures. for breaches and failure to follow procedures, just like you didn't wear your badge. What is the issue, or what are the repercussions? Do you not work that day? Do they send you home, or are you able to get a visitor's badge and then do your work? But there are certain areas, obviously, you couldn't get into with a visitor's badge. And then sources of information. Where is the information coming from? What are our various sources of information? Disaster recovery, I jumped too far, didn't I? Policy for system acquisition. How are we going to acquire these things? And the disaster recovery procedures and the lines of responsibility. And then where are the sources of information? Yeah, where can the users get their information? And all this is going to have to be wrapped up into some sort of a training program to be sure that they get out. HR is going to be a number of places going to have policies. HR is going to have the policies. They are responsible for recruitment, onboarding, and termination, offboarding of individuals. They should have a secure interview process and screen employees. There should be at least a basic screening of all employees, and maybe a more in-depth for others. Like your IT people, you really do want to have a pretty good background investigation of, because when you think about it, you really have access to an awful lot of information if you choose to do that. I always didn't go look for things unless somebody did something stupid, like you did a virus scan of the home directories, and then these things pop up for whatever. There may or may not have been viruses, but they were suspect files. And then you go to look in the folder for suspect files, and you find all sorts of nonsense that shouldn't be there. So you have to be aware of your responsibilities also. In employee screening, you really have to be careful for a number of people, but some sort of screening for all people. Operations, they do employee policies, for instance, acceptable use policy. They're responsible for training and education, so they need to set up a training program, and then you have a training policy. I think that one of the things that we probably don't do all that well, I think we did a reasonable job in the Navy, because there were so many inspections. You had to have training in order to pass the inspections. But the companies, and it's not that many, but the companies that I worked for didn't really have, I thought, a real effective training program. One had a real good orientation program by HR, but once the orientation program was over, that was about it. The other one kind of sort of had a, here you go, show them around what to do, how to get onto the network, and where their office is and their computer is, and how do they get to their course material, those sorts of things. HR is also responsible for separation for offboarding. That can be an unpleasant experience many times, and IT is probably going to get involved in this. I know I did. When they call up and say, I'm going to separate so-and-so today, I want you to disable their account at a particular time. So you have to be involved in those processes, and then you can't tell them that that's going to happen. I had a guy one time said he knew he was going to get fired because he came to work and he couldn't get logged into the network. That may be one of your first indicators. Operational policies, we talked about separation of duties, and separation of duties may cause you more work, but can also make things more secure, where nobody can do the complete job. A shared authority, one user is able to do an action, but they can't really make changes on their own authority. Standard operating procedures, employee has no excuse for not following the protocol. We have standard procedures. The shared authority, separation of duties is you do part of it and I do part of it. Shared authority is you have the N of M we talked about for recovery. If so that we have 4 recovery agents, we had to have 2 of them present to recover a file or to recover a certificate. Then N of M would be 2 of 4. We should always use least privilege, only give users the authority that they need to do their job. And back to auditing, logging and auditing. Mandatory vacations. I've been a lot of places I wish I had a mandatory vacation, but what mandatory vacations do for you is the person gets out of the job, and if there's anything wrong, you may find it because somebody else is going to have to do their job for them. Job rotation and rotating people among jobs, around through jobs. This kind of gives you an audit of the job. What have they been doing? What kind of job have they been doing? Have they been doing anything that they shouldn't have been doing? Whistleblowing, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle whistleblowers in those things? Prevent tailgating, and tailgating, you remember, is when you open the door and somebody else comes in behind you or in front of you. They're holding a bunch of packages. You open the door and let them in, even though they haven't used their badge to open the door or their codes to open the door. It's a great way to get in. One of the ways people like to be nice, stand there with a big heavy box or something, see if they'll open the door for you, because the big heavy box would probably cover where your badge was supposed to be also. Or be the UPS or FedEx delivery person. They'll let you in as long as you've got a uniform and look good. Password behaviors. What kind of passwords are we going to have? And then formal policy on good passwords and credential management. You can have a policy on good passwords. You can enforce complex passwords. The one that they use for the labs, PA $$W0RD, is a complex password. It has 3 of the 4 elements. It has uppercase, lowercase. Actually, it has 4 of the 4 elements, doesn't it? Uppercase, lowercase, special characters, and numbers. It's not a good password, but it's a secure password. You need to train users how to develop good passwords. One of the commands I was at, they assigned passwords. We handled secret material on the computers, and they assigned us passwords every 14 days. And then they come around and check, see if you've written it down, stuck it under your in the top drawer of your desk or whatever else. Clean desk policy. People don't leave things on their desks during lunch or after working hours. They say that could reveal things. Probably nothing should be there. Put it all away so that there is no temptation for somebody to come try to sneak a look at things. The acceptable use policies are the things that I think sometimes get us, that they're poorly written or they don't exist or people aren't really aware of them. But it is what you're allowed to do with the company resources. And we got into that. We had a discussion yesterday, and that's the last bullet, the BYOD, the personal devices. How are you going to control those? What kind of control are you going to have over those? What are the restrictions on them? And they need to be laid out in the acceptable use policy. I think that a number of people are still just allowing internet access with the personal devices. But then you get into what kind of liability does the company have for what you may do with an internet connection? And how much time are you going to spend on Facebook? Are you allowed to go to those sites? Which sites are you allowed to go to? And we spend a lot of time, or at least in the school, we spend a lot of time trying to keep people away from places that they shouldn't be. I had a guy one time failed a Cisco course because he spent most of his time trying to get to websites that were prohibited by the proxy server, but people will try to find ways around those sites, around to those sites. Privacy in the workplace is kind of a, yes, you kind of have a right to privacy, and yes, you kind of don't have a right to privacy in the workplace. What privacy do you have? And that, I think, is going to be one of those things that is in the agreement. How much privacy do you actually get? Now, you do have an expectation that they won't reveal your personally identifiable information, and I think what they talk about here is if you give your address and phone number to Amazon, you expect them to use the address to deliver whatever you ordered and your phone number if something's wrong with the order, to call you and tell you that some area needs to be corrected. You don't expect them to sell it to a third party so you get robocalls, or you get offered, you know, a lot of other specials. You expect the information that you provide to be used for the purpose that it's provided, the same way in the workplace, that people aren't revealing that information. And they talk about, yesterday we mentioned at least social networking, and companies would like for you to post obviously positive things about the company on social networks. People tend to sometimes give a little bit too much information on social networks. You need to be aware of that and careful of that. Conditions of employment can lay out a number of items where there are some controls. May set out what the employee must agree to as a condition of employment. So what can you do, what can't you do? Surveillance is one of the things that they should be aware of, and we can do surveillance for a couple of things: security assurance, monitor data communications, may have CCTV to prevent theft, those kinds of things. Monitor data to measure productivity, and then physical monitoring, CCTV, we're looking for theft, drug, alcohol use, those kinds of things. There may be monitoring to see if you're in sales, maybe, that how many phone calls are you making, how long are the phone calls? Are you using the phone for company business, or are you using it for personal business? Can you use the phone for personal business? All of those things have to be laid out in policies. Acceptable use for not just computers and those sorts of things, but telephone, personal devices. What can and can't the user do? Standards and best practices. A measure by which we evaluate compliance with that policy. A procedure is a step-by-step listing of the actions that must be completed for any given task. These are usually required. They're inflexible, don't have the flexibility. Guidance is the best practices. The guidelines exist for the areas or policy where there are no procedures, and guidance are more flexible. Guidance is more flexible than procedures. Procedures are do this, do this, do this, checklist sort of things. Compliance and the laws, and we really want to do that. Due diligence means that we've taken precautions, which what it really means is we haven't been negligent. Legislation, which may or may not apply. Sarbanes-Oxley mandated the implementation of risk assessment and internal controls and audit procedures. This was after a number of things happened, including the collapse of Enron, where a lot of people lost a lot of money, and the people that worked there lost an awful lot because I think they were one of the companies that insisted that your 401k be invested in their stock. Computer Security Act This one requires federal agencies to develop security policies for computer systems that process confidential information. Graham, Leach, Biley, and the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, all address protection of private information. So HIPAA for medical information, the others a lot are revolve around financial institutions, and we want those to be solid because no runs on the banks, those sorts of things. Anyhow, civil liabilities, and the securities where the liability can't be assigned to the perpetrator. If you can't catch the guy that broke in, then you can sue the people that didn't protect the network. Industry standards and regulations, payment card industry data security standard, how credit cards are processed, those sorts of things, all of those have to be part of compliance. Policy, training, and user habits, and this is right out of the book, I think. Overview of the organization's security policies and penalties for non-compliance. This is what should be in the training. The incident response, identification, and reporting procedures, what's going to happen if and when we have an incident. The site security procedures, restrictions, and advice, including the safety drills, escorting guests. Dean's going to shoot them, but use of secure areas and use of personal devices, all of those things have to be in the policy and in the training, and what we're trying to develop is good habits for users, that they pay attention to what's going on. Data handling, personal information, backup encryption, those sorts of things have to be there. Password account management plus security features of the PCs and mobile devices. Awareness of social engineering and malware threats, and this is one that get a lot of people. If it wasn't working, you wouldn't get all that spam. Somebody's clicking on that stuff, and Kevin's going to get $1 billion from his internet connections. He's not paying attention, is he? Phishing, websites, exploits, spam, alerting methods for new thefts. Secure use of software such as browsers and email clients plus appropriate use of internet access. And this includes the social networking sites. Can you get to them? Do we want to allow people to do that? They can take a lot of time out of a day if you allow users to get there, to go there. What we wound up doing was not, and it wasn't the corporate policy, it was our own little policy that we came up with. We blocked the social networking sites in the classrooms, but allowed access in the library. So what kind of policies do you want, are you going to have? And back to the training here, this training back here for the users shouldn't be technical. Don't start with things that they're going to make their eyes glaze over. All of us that were in the military probably still tend to use a lot of that jargon, and it is jargon. IT people tend to use jargon, and it is jargon. You need to, when you train the users, use the language that they'll understand. That's something that applies directly to them, so that they don't turn you off immediately. Role-based training, and this is the appropriate language for the role. This is where you may want to use technical, and the level of technical content is there. Back to the use regular language. We used to have students give presentations on technical, how they would explain it to their bosses. And what I always like to do is get the English instructor to come in and listen to the presentation. And if she understood it, then they had done a good job in doing it in English and not in IT language. Follow up on the training, gather metrics, follow up, try to determine if the training was effective, feedback, what made sense, what didn't make sense, so that you can, just like any other stuff, you can modify, make changes that are required. So the review here is describe the use of security policy and standards and guidelines, understand the importance of operational policies in reducing risk, understand the use of privacy and acceptable use policies, understand the importance of security awareness training. When you have to write a policy, SANS.org has some really good templates on how to develop the policies that you're going to have to write. You're going to have a corporate policy, and under the corporate policy, you're going to have a lot of individual policies that have to be set up and followed, enforced, checked, updated constantly. And you get the idea that all of IT is kind of a treadmill that you're constantly updating these things that you did. So let's do the questions. In what situation would it be appropriate to apply a separation of duties to privilege management?
If it entails their job directly.
Yeah, if you don't want somebody else. Let's see what they say. Any task that should not be actioned by a single person. You know, things like using nuclear weapons. I don't know what you would do in a company.
Oh, like, you know, using your own devices.
Yeah. So typically this is to prevent fraud or embezzlement. I can give you an example of that is two-party signatures on checks.
Oh, yeah.
My wife was an officer in the PTA. You ever notice how many PTA and rescue squad and so on treasurers get arrested for embezzlement? And one of the reasons is in those volunteer organizations, nobody wants to have anything to do with managing money. But if you have two-party control in that you have dual signature on the check requirement, that can help a lot in preventing those kinds of things. So that's the kind of thing that they're talking about. What type of organizational policy ensures that at least two people have oversight of critical business processes? Did everybody else leave except you and me, Dean?
No, I think there's a couple left in here. I'm just trying to find it, and I don't remember that one.
What they say is job rotation, which kind of is and kind of isn't. Job rotation, you go around and you're probably going to have more than one job, but the M of N kind of guys, when we have to have the multiple control, like we had to have two people to recover the certificate, for instance, or maybe three, whatever you require, but whichever ones you describe as M of N, and they say job rotation. Job rotation, don't know. I mean, that may be more than two people, maybe multiple people with oversight when we do that. What sort of workplace security issues should be covered by HR policies? That one can go on forever.
Introduction, fire, hire, rehire.
Yeah, all of those things.
Pay time off, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Acceptable use, separation of duties, the things you said, privacy, data handling, security awareness training. That's all HR. They do a lot of stuff, but they're not going to be the technical expertise for these things. And I didn't do this one. The type of software that assists with the collection of training metrics, they say learning management systems, LMSs. LMSs, I always thought were what you use to provide the training, not necessarily the feedback. But learning management systems for a collection of training metrics. True or false? It is important to publish all security alerts to all members of the staff.
True?
Say true on that one.
Yeah.
Well, no, false.
Well, because you may wind up creating a panic, for one thing. You know, it should only be sent to the people that can deal with them. Because why would you want to say security alert? You know, we may have an intrusion here. Why would you want to send it to all of the input individuals or things like all the temporary employees? So that one is false. Good recovery. What risk, apart from time wasting, might employee use of social networking pose to an organization?
Virus.
What did you say, fire him?
I said virus.
Virus, that's true. Virus could reveal confidential information. Keeping in mind that hackers take little bits and little bits and little bits and put them together and make them big bits. Take little rocks, put them together and make big rocks out of them. Any piece of information that they can get from any source is going to be useful to them. Why should an organization design role-based training programs?
Because it really, you know, you train how you fight how you know, stuff like that, and it's the same thing. Is, you know, you learn exactly what's going on, so if it does happen, you're not surprised, and you know, you don't have that pause, and all of a sudden, you know, the stuff hits the fan.
Yep. And you can't really do a one-size-fits-all for this kind of training because everybody's going to have a different technical levels, different responsibilities. So you're going to have the general training for everybody and then the role-based training for each of those other individuals. I think we've covered the book. Now there is a section, I think all you guys have probably already taken at least one cert test. So you can look at that and see. My advice on studying, and I've taken a bunch of cert tests, some of you also have, go through the test banks, and Kevin said that they had not updated, and I don't know, that the metrics that matter. I put the link again for the blog site, which really doesn't have a whole lot on it. It's got the lectures. It also has a link to a Dropbox that was the wrong link last night. So if you put it in, you got Network Plus and not Security Plus. It should be correct tonight. It has in there a study guide. It has the study guides from LeaderQuest. It has another study guide. I forgot who did it. It also has a test bank from actual tests, which is, you probably won't want to do them all. It's got over 1,700 questions in it. But those are the kinds of questions, I won't say those are the questions, those are the kinds of questions that you could expect to see on the based on previous experiences. Can't say, you know, the past performance is no guarantee of future success, but in the past they've appeared there. They've been good study guides. If something you don't understand, look it up, find out why it's that way. If you can build a lab to do it, try the lab out. But as I said earlier,